Welcome to Click for IB Biology. We're studying topic D 3.1, reproduction. And in this particular video, we're going to be looking at what are called the ovarian and uterine cycles. And these combine into the better known menstrual cycle. There is a PDF of this presentation that is linked into the description below. You can download that and annotate with your own notes as we go along. But then there's also a 10-question quiz with answers that you can use to evaluate your own learning of this content. So to the menstrual cycle. We're going to be considering three aspects: the pituitary hormones produced in the brain from the pituitary gland. These are FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. We will also be looking at the ovarian hormones, hormones produced by the ovary itself, and these are estrogen and progesterone. And the third aspect that we will consider is the development of the lining of the uterus, which is known as the endometrium. The coordination of the events of pituitary hormones and ovarian hormones establishes three basic ideas. One is the development of the egg cell, beginning with the primary follicle. Two, the release of the egg from the ovary. And this will occur at approximately the 13th or 14th day of the cycle, what we would call mid-cycle. That's the second thing to consider. And the third thing to consider is the development of the lining of the uterus and then its maintenance in the second phase. First phase of the uterus development is the building up of the lining, and then the second phase is the maintenance. So the hormones that are involved, let's look at their cycling events. So the hormone FSH is produced by the pituitary at the beginning of the cycle from day 0. And this largely remains relatively low levels. But the effect of the follicle stimulating hormone, as the name suggests, is to stimulate the primary follicle. Now, if I draw a small diagram of this, the follicle is composed of a sphere of diploid cells, and within them there is the haploid oocyte or egg cell. Let's call that the egg cell. And so this follicle, under the influence of FSH, will enlarge its size. And I've shown that enlarging process in a sequence here, and that would culminate in the level known as the secondary follicle. As the follicle increases in size, these follicular cells shown here, they produce the hormone estrogen. Estrogen is a collective term for a number of specific types of estrogen hormone. So we will just use that term to cover all of those variations. The estrogen has a number of effects. One is to bring about the development of the lining of the uterus during the first phase of the cycle, so that the endometrium will become thicker and thicker under the influence of estrogen itself. The second thing that estrogen does is that it actually has a negative feedback influence on FSH, maintaining the levels of FSH relatively low. As we reach mid-cycle, with the uterus already developed, there is a surge in FSH, and then a surge in, also a surge in estrogen here, which leads to a surge in luteinizing hormone. And the influence of this is to weaken the cells of the secondary follicle, often now known actually as a Graafian follicle, such that the wall will rupture and an egg will be released from the ovary. We are now in day 14 of the cycle. This egg enters the oviduct and begins to travel down the oviduct over the following few days. It is approaching the endometrium, the uterus, shown here in pink, in structure D, and you will notice from the diagram here that already the uterus is already thickened in preparation for receiving and supporting the development of a fertilized egg. In our description, we are only considering that the idea of the egg is not fertilized. After the egg is released from the ovary, from the secondary Graafian follicle, the function of that follicle changes and becomes this structure here, which is called the corpus luteum, and that translates as yellow body. But more importantly, the corpus luteum is responsible for the production of progesterone. Progesterone maintains the lining of the uterus. So estrogen is responsible for thickening of the endometrium, but progesterone is responsible for maintaining the thickness of the uterus in preparation for receiving a fertilized egg. Now, as I mentioned, we're considering a menstrual cycle in which no fertilization has occurred. And as a consequence, the corpus luteum will actually begin to degenerate, along with a fall in the progesterone. What then begins to happen at the 28th day of the cycle is that the lining of the uterus will begin to break down. And of course, this is known as the end of the cycle and the beginning of the menstrual cycle, menstrual period, in which the lining breaks down with menstrual bleeding, which idealistically, theoretically, occurs over the first 2, 3, 4, 5 days of the cycle. In the diagram, the cycle is drawn as a 28-day cycle. This is an ideal cycle length or a theoretical cycle length. What is actually experienced by women are cycles which can be shorter than these and longer than these and be perfectly normal cycles in their own right. The information that I've just presented is often shown in a more complex diagram in which we have hormone levels on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, with in my diagram, the primary events to be considered and through the coordination. And so we can see here that in red we have the FSH levels relatively low during the first half of the cycle, but bringing about the development of the primordial follicles or primary follicles into secondary follicles. Those follicles are increasingly producing estrogen, shown here in green. So this is estrogen. And that peak of estrogen around the 12th, 13th day then brings about a surge in this hormone here, which is the luteinizing hormone, once more from the pituitary, and with a surge of FSH as well, brings about the release of the egg called ovulation. Thereafter, the follicle takes on the form of the corpus luteum and its progesterone production, which you can see rising here. And that progesterone production is maintaining the lining of the uterus. This may be a more typical form of graphs shown in examination. The next video considers how to overcome barriers to infertility in IVF. There's a chance to subscribe to the channel in the middle there, and the playlist with all of the reproduction D3.1 videos shown in the playlist on the right hand side.